The first round of Level 1 CFA exams start in just less than 2 weeks. And as much as everyone has been talking about the new computer-based testing system, myself included, in the final months and especially the final weeks before any CFA exam, it's going to be extremely important for all you candidates to prioritize the things that are going to improve your chances to pass the most. And those are practice exams and memorizing formulas. Many people recommend taking 2 to 3 full practice exams, but you should be hitting practice exams hard, and for a lot of people, that's going to mean a lot more than 2 to 3. Personally, I would recommend a number much more like 10 plus. That's what I did before all 3 levels of the CFA exam. I think it's a big factor and the reason why I was able to pass all 3 levels. It is the most beneficial thing you can do in the weeks before an exam. Like, taking more practice exams certainly is not going to hurt your chances of passing, and if you're prioritizing your life around passing these tests, why not just optimize those? And almost as important as the quantity of practice exams that you take is the quality of those practice exams. There's some debate around how these practice exams should be taken. The really hardcore people say that you need to blockade yourself off on a Saturday morning starting at 8 a.m. to replicate the exam as closely as possible. Take the first half in 3 hours, give yourself a 1-hour lunch break, take the second half in 3 hours so that everything is like what you'll experience on exam day. The other side of the spectrum has people who are really casual about it, saying they kind of just mosey through the practice questions and treat them as an EOC question or something to that effect. What I did, and what is my recommendation to any candidates now, falls between those two camps, and it's again a big part of why I think I was able to pass all 3 exams on the first try. These practice exams don't have to be taken all at one time, so if you've seen my other stuff, you know that I did like 3 hours per day and just a regular study interval. I would work these practice exams into that regular 3-hour schedule, and at the end of 3 hours, if I was on question 114, I would stop on question 114, or maybe at least check the answers for that one. But I didn't try to replicate the complete structure of the CFA exams in the practice exams just because of practicality's sake. I don't think that finishing right on question 120 specifically is going to make all that much of a difference when you're under a regular schedule going to get through the 120 questions anyway. It's more important to just actually do them and learn them. So for me, it was about 10 to 20 questions at a time. I would just kind of put them in blocks and go block by block. For the level 1 exam, this is really easy to break them up this way. For the level 2 exam, if you're doing vignettes, there's 6 question vignettes. So either do 2 vignettes or 3 vignettes and consider that one block. Then when you finish answering all those questions, you're going to look at the answer key. Any questions that you got wrong, of course, you need to look at why you got them wrong and learn from the description of the answer in the answer key. If the description doesn't give you enough information to teach you why you got it wrong, you need to go back to the CFA material and find where in the text that specific question comes from and really learn it. But the point is that you're doing these in timed blocks to replicate the pace of the exam. Like if you're, again, doing level 2, just do the vignettes in the same amount of time that you'd actually have for the real exam. Level 1, super easy. You have like 45 seconds per question or something like that. Just do the math to know for sure. That's how much time you give yourself for the 10 or 20 questions. And then you go back and learn from them. And I think the 10 to 20 number is important because it's enough to differentiate the type of material that you're getting tested on. And it's enough to space it out in your mind such that question number 17 is going to be pretty far after question number 2 or 3. So there's enough time there in terms of processing other questions to make you have kind of forgotten where you were earlier on so that it feels like a regular testing environment. That way that when you are reviewing all of them, you kind of look back at if you got number 2 or 3 wrong in this example, like, oh yeah, that's what I was thinking then. This is why it was wrong. I think that type of recollection and that type of retroactive learning can really help your mind solidify certain topics that you're going to need to know for the real exam. Again, you're still timing these blocks, but you're not doing it in one 6-hour interval, actually 4.5-hour interval now that the exams are all going to be shorter. I don't think it's that important to replicate it perfectly. It can be helpful to replicate it perfectly. Each year, I actually signed up for a live mock exam, which happened 2 Saturdays before the actual exam. It was sponsored by my local CFA society, and so if you have that available to you, just go ahead and sign up for it. I've talked about it in other videos. It's the Kaplan live mock that I would take. That one did replicate the entire exam day process. It doesn't hurt to do. It's just not as beneficial as actually learning the material, which is why I think going block by block is a lot more realistic from a scheduling perspective, but still accomplishes the primary goal here. A very important distinction in how I recommend people study for these exams is that you haven't memorized any of the formulas yet, so you are still using a cheat sheet during all of these practice exams. If you've seen any of my stuff about the secret to passing the exams or what to do in the last 3 days before the exams, it's all about formula memorization, so you will get there. But while you're taking these exams, there'll be a handful of formulas that you actually have memorized by now just because you ran into the same question 4 times in blue boxes and 6 times in EOCs and in quizzes and in this practice exam that you're doing now, and so on and so forth. So easy formulas like the Gordon growth model or something in level 1 or level 2 equities, you're going to remember that type of stuff. Point is, you're not spending any time memorizing the longer stuff. You're just memorizing and learning when you're going to have to use those formulas and then what variables get plugged into those formulas in what spots. It's okay to continue to use your cheat sheet or your note sheet from all the learning that you've been doing over the past 3, 6, 9 months. Sure, that can slow you down. It's okay if you want to like subtract out the time that you spent flipping through pages looking for the formula that you need, because you're not going to be doing that in the exam because you're going to have memorized all those formulas in the last few days. But just be realistic with yourself. Don't spend 4 minutes like looking for a formula where you're actually like working through how 2 different formulas might be used for the same question. Read the question, make a decision on how you think you're going to answer it, find that formula, write it down, plug the variables in, and if your answer is right or wrong, just learn from the mistakes or know that you got it right. You can see here now that I did the questions in timed blocks, but not strictly timed blocks. And I was also using a cheat sheet to get all the formulas to work through the questions. So I'm not really replicating the full exam. I still think that is okay. I really think this is the best way to go about completing the practice exams. It's going to be the most efficient way for your brain to learn the material that's tested in those practice exams, which ultimately is what you're trying to do so that you can answer the most questions right on the real deal. Now let's talk a little bit about those last 3 days before the exam. I recommend taking 2 of them, 12 hours each day, just doing formula memorization. And then the final day, which historically was always a Friday right before the Saturday of the exam, but for you, could be any day of the week depending on when you schedule your exam in the testing window. Anyway, the 24 hours before the exam, you probably want to be giving yourself a break. Here's the best structure for memorizing all those formulas. Now, I did not come up with this myself. I took these tips directly from Mark Meldrum before I took the level 1 exam, used it in level 1, 2, and 3. I think it worked wonders, and it's probably the best way to store formulas in your middle term memory, which I think is like 4 hours to 48 hours or something like that. Don't quote me on that, but it's just enough time so that you have them kind of stored in your brain to be able to answer the questions right. Memorizing formulas is not something that the Institute wants you to have done for the next 40 years of your career or whatever. You just need to be able to do them for the exam. And the way that you do that is starting with all the formulas you need. You can either do that through like the Wiley or Kaplan formula sheets. Now those are too long. Watch my other videos about formula sheet guides. You need to narrow those down. I just highlighted all the formulas that I ever used to answer any type of practice question throughout my whole study process, such that in the last month or last 6 weeks, I knew exactly which formulas, they were highlighted in my notebook, I had used to answer a question. I thought those were the most important formulas. All of those amounted to about 50 or 60% of what the Wiley formula sheets had. I used the Wiley formula sheets too. So I audited myself a little bit with those formula sheets, but I did feel that my list was more beneficial for what I thought I would see on the exams relative to what Wiley gave you. They have some really long-winded stuff on those formula sheets that I don't recommend anyone taking the time to try to memorize. So anyway, you got to have the right formulas. When you have them all listed out, for me, it was like between 75 and 100 formulas. Write each formula down 10 to 15 times on a sheet of paper over and over and over. Feel free to order this out by book, like all the equity, and then all the fixed income, all the corporate finance, all the econ, whatever. It doesn't really matter. Just make sure that you are writing each formula 10 times. We're going one by one here though. So after you've written a certain formula down 10 times, close your eyes and make sure that you can repeat it to yourself 2, 3, 4, 5 times so that you know it's in your brain, not just like a muscle memory thing since you just wrote it so much. If you can accurately recite that formula to yourself 5 times, you have it in your short-term memory. So I think you're good to go on to the next one. For this next formula, write it down 10 to 15 times. Your hand is going to get extremely tired. This last 48 hours will be the most physically demanding of your entire CFA study prep process. After you've physically gotten through 10 formulas, like written each one 10 times and then set it in your head 3 to 5 times, then start back at the top of the list. Make sure that you actually have each one of those memorized. You can kind of cover up most of it with an index card, everything but the title of the formula. So maybe title it and then write it, title it, then write it, so that when you go back, you can cover those up. Make sure that you've actually stored the formulas in your medium-term memory, not just your short-term memory when you're writing them all down, because the medium-term memory is what's going to be most important for passing the exam. Like I said, 12 hours a day for 2 days, so it's going to be a long day. And at the end of these 12 hours, hopefully you've gotten through the first half or so of the formulas that you think you're going to need memorized to pass the exam, and you have most of them actually memorized. Day 2, which for me was a Thursday, same thing. Hopefully you can get the time off work. I always took Wednesday, Thursday, Friday off work. Again, your exam could be anywhere in the week, but point is, Another 12 hours, get through all the second half of the formulas. And then in the second day, after every 10 of the formulas that you're writing and then reciting and then making sure you had memorized, go back to some of the older formulas you did the day before to make sure those are still stored in your short and your medium-term memory as well. Trust me, you're going to be like icing your hand, massaging your hand, trying to just get it back to a place where it can continue to write, because you're going to be writing like thousands of lines of formulas, and it's going to help you big time. I've said it before, I'll say it again. Spending the last 2 to 3 days memorizing all the formulas that you think are going to be relevant or that your test prep provider says are relevant is the secret to passing the CFA exams. I think it is the one major factor that differentiates candidates that pass from candidates who fail. I think if you interviewed every single candidate that passed and failed, which is all of them, and you tried to determine what one factor during their test prep process most closely correlated into failure rates or pass rates, I think it would be if they memorized all the formulas, especially for level 1. It's going to be extremely important. Okay, now that you know you need to be memorizing formulas, in the last 24 hours, just give yourself a break. These exams are so long, you've been studying for so many months, there is not all that much more that you can learn in 20 hours that's going to come up in the exam. If you crammed for the last 24 hours straight, sure, maybe you might see 4 or 5 questions that you otherwise couldn't have answered, that maybe your study in the last day got you to a position where you could answer them. But that's also going to fatigue you much more, such that your brain may be unable to answer other questions that you could have otherwise gotten correctly if you felt really fresh. So I think it's more important to feel fresh than to try to grind out information for another handful of questions. Spend the day doing some yard work, light exercise, go see a movie, go to a park, hang out with a significant other, whatever. Things that you enjoy, things that you can kind of try to relax with so that you feel really good on exam day. There you have it. Those are, I think, the best tips for any 2021 CFA exam candidate, especially level 1 candidates. If you've gotten to this point in the video, it means that you watched the whole thing. I very much appreciate that. The YouTube algorithm loves long watch times in terms of total minutes watched, but also a percentage of the video. If you could also like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, both of those also help me out and I appreciate them too. As always, thanks for watching.